retreated to paper for technical difficulties. So for what that means. So I am from the Department of History, and I first became involved in this project, and the reason I'm speaking to you today is because my department said, hey Heidi, you know something about technology, and we need someone to do a needs assessment for our department on all the problems we're having with technology. So can you do that? That's my service. Lucky me. And I went to saw that a town hall meeting was advertised October the 9th about the new Microsoft Office 365 product, which I was going to go to learn more about for my department colleagues. Didn't know anything actually about the product at the time. I use Office, so I thought it was an Office upgrade. And the night before, as one happens to do with one's spouse, and mine happens to be in IT, I said, what are you doing tomorrow? And we were exchanging that information, and I mentioned I was going to this town hall in Office 365. And he said, what? What is, the university is considering this? Do you know what this is? Office upgrade. He said, no, and 5 hours of industry reading that he sent me later, I started to understand that this might be a problem. And I attended the town hall the next day with an open mind, but with some questions and concerns about outsourcing our data to the United States, because I am, as I said, a historian, and I know about archives. And I want to keep in mind that when we talk about this, and a lot of times we keep talking about email outsourcing, or outsourcing or email. The focus seems to be on email. But Office 365, as I have now learned, is a comprehensive e-communications and e-collaboration suite of tools. It's a unified communications tool. And in using it, or any such suite of tools, as an institution, we create an archive of our data. Not just the email messages we send and receive and store in the 25 gigabytes of our inboxes, which we should never need to delete, in theory. The documents we collaborate on and place in the SkyDrive, our calendaring data, our text, and our instant messaging. And I like to say that as a historian and a researcher who works with digital technologies, I was really actually excited by the potential of this cloud computing model to work and to do this. So, and I know my colleagues are as well. So the issue here is not about the technology. In fact, I think that it would be fantastic for a world-class university like ours to have this kind of opportunity and this suite of tools. So, but in addition then to this data that I'm talking about in our archive, there of course is the metadata that each email, each text, each file, each call contains, as people have talked today about metadata, but I don't think we can underscore this enough. The dates and times of our activities, the patterns of our associations, the people who make up our communications networks. This is crucial. And it's because we're talking about archives that I'm here today. From the historian's perspective, what the proposed outsourcing plan means is that the University of Toronto will be creating an archive of itself containing a rich source of information about its people and their many and diverse activities. And my colleagues in the history department, with whom I've discussed this extensively, and I suggest strongly we need to think very carefully about the implications of doing so. Because as historians, we do know about archives. And after all, I technically read dead people's mail for a living. Ambrose Bierce, author of the 1911 Devil's Dictionary, defined historians as broad-gauge gossips. And he does have a point. As odd as it may seem to draw parallels between the historical work and the surveillance of state agencies such as the NSA and the Communications Security Establishment Canada, and they are hiring, by the way, we historians share with those agencies the desire to know as much as we can about everything that happened. I cannot count the number of times colleagues and I have lamented at conferences about the lack of documentation on a particular event, or wished we had been a fly on the wall at the meeting of figures key in our research. We like our archives to be as comprehensive as possible, so you might think we would look forward to this brave new world of infinitely richer sources to study. Well, there is, of course, the old adage, be careful what you wish for, because you just might get it. Before the Snowden revelations, beginning this past June, there was certainly widespread speculation, science fiction writing, and regular Hollywood representations about the power of new technology to enhance state surveillance. But we now have significant information about data collection directed towards both public figures, from foreign world leaders, of course, to ordinary people in the US and around the world, okay, by the United States and its National Security Administration on a massive scale. So what? I think we've heard quite clearly that there's a pretty big deal about outsourcing then to the United States, and I won't repeat those arguments. As other speakers today have made clear, with Microsoft Office 365, our University of Toronto e-archive will be outside of Canadian jurisdiction, outside of Canadian law, and our data will not have protection from lawful state surveillance. As stakeholders, as citizens, this concerns us, rather a lot, in fact, because as historians, we also know more than a thing or two about what states do when given, or when they take, the power to create and use archives of information about their citizens against their citizens. So I could take you on a long journey through time of what states do with power and the consequences for people. A few examples in living memory should suffice. And as I give these examples, I want you to imagine what these examples would look like if today's technology existed. So we can look, of course, to the ways in which totalitarian regimes, such as East Germany, created secret archives after World War II, and how their secret police, the Stasi, used that information against their own people. And more relevant to this discussion, the history of what we're talking about here, though, is that Western democracies have their own long history of legal and sorry, can't read my own writing here, judicially, their own history of these practices, okay? Even in Canada, we've seen prominent activists such as Tommy Douglas, who is one of the architects of Medicare and a member of Parliament, be the subject of RCMP surveillance, along with many left-wing academics. And this is before CSIS was created, when national security was part of the RCMP's mandate. In the United States, look to the Red Scare of the 1950s, which saw the widespread suspension of civil liberties, a period that has affected our notable colleague, the Holbrook Prize-winning and internationally lauded historian of the early modern world, Natalie Zemon Davis. It's publicly known, of course, that as a result of being targeted for the crime of political dissent, she and her husband lost their passports. She was unable to travel to France to complete her research. Her husband, Chandler Davis, the mathematician, lost his university position and served 6 months in jail in the States for refusing to name names to the House of Un-American Activities. During the Civil Rights Movement, many leaders themselves were targets of FBI surveillance. But this all occurred in the pre-9/11 world, which was significantly different for two important reasons. First, as I said, the surveillance technology is a lot less than it is today. And second, there were actually many more legal constraints on what the state could do, what law enforcement could do. So it's not just that there has been a truly dizzying pace of technological change, but also that in the post-9/11 world, and it's just in the past 20 years too, that lawmakers have given, American lawmakers in particular, have given their intelligence agencies unprecedented, largely unlimited, and largely unchecked powers. In addition, agreements, such as the Five Eyes Alliance between the United States, Canada, Britain, New Zealand, and Australia, enable data sharing. And it's this kind of data sharing, you recall, and we've already discussed, that led to the unlawful and unwarranted arrest, rendition, and torture of Meher Arar. So the key point here is that our metadata, it's our metadata that's so crucial to this discussion. Okay? In all of these cases of state surveillance I have mentioned, we're concerned with mapping the associations people had with one another. It's the associations. And we historians know about metadata. In the colonial archives in which I work, I'm in the British colonial archives, the 18th and 19th century correspondence logs of incoming and outgoing letters are crucial sources. A letter on its own tells you a little bit, the content. A letter in the full context of a chain of correspondence, mapped and charted over space and time, helps you assess the importance of information contained within. They help you track who was talking to whom about what. Was the news in one letter of so little consequence that it was never repeated? Or did the information received spark a flurry of correspondence? In my cases, for example, from a small British military post on the Great Lakes to all other posts in the region and up the command chain to the British Lords of Trade, perhaps to the eyes of His Majesty himself. Metadata is what historians want. It helps us to contextualize and identify significance in data. And where we don't have it, we create it. We create finding aids. And metadata is what the NSA and CSEC want. Digital metadata is easier to analyze with software tools than the content of letters. And best of all, at least some metadata must remain unencrypted in transit. It's a classic example, of course, you can write a letter in code and put it in an envelope, but you can't encrypt the address information or the letter will never reach its destination. So by moving the university's archive to the USA, we make the metadata and by extension our associations vulnerable to legal state surveillance and then data sharing through the Five Eyes Alliance. But then again, so what? How could this proposed outsourcing threaten academic freedom and the ability to conduct research in Canada? And I've been asking this question with my colleagues and they've had lots to say. And it's in multiple ways. And I'm going to give you 3 quick examples. I have a colleague researching the history of undocumented foreign workers in a country that is friendly to the United States and engaged in data sharing agreements with them. Disclosure of identifying information about these workers would have very real consequences for their lives. Another works on the history of an important U.S. ally and is researching in an area that is critical of this state's policies towards non-citizens, providing counter-evidence to claims the state is making in international media. Another works on the history of an important U.S. ally and is researching in an area that is, another is in regular correspondence with political activists and colleagues in countries the USA considers enemies. And yes, I was deliberately being circumspect. This is what happens when a chill is cast over academic freedom. People start to worry about what they can say and to whom, and what topics are safe and which are risky. And the capacity for the university to support open and free inquiry is diminished. And for those of us who rely on living informants or who conduct oral history interviews, and many of my colleagues, our reputational question is also key. If our sources cannot trust what will become of the information they provide to us and how it will be safeguarded, if our sources don't feel safe, they are not going to share information. There are a couple of other reasons as well, and it underscores the need for greater consultation with stakeholders to fully understand all the issues. Okay, so we moved to the first Office 365 with the students because there was no financial cost to the university. Information services look to provide the best service for the least cost and to provide improved e-communications infrastructure. But as we have heard repeatedly, the cheapest solution does not mean it meets the requirements. This is true in many sectors, in medicine and aviation, to name but 2, where the cheapest technical solution may not meet regulatory, safety, or mission-critical requirements. I encourage you all to read the information risk and risk management document provided by Information and Technology Services on their website. While this version does discuss the university's responsibility to protect privacy under FIPA, there is no mention of another key stakeholder requirement, as was mentioned a little earlier today, of the tri-council agencies. All faculty with grant funding from one of 3 federal agencies, SSHRC, Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council, Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council, or NSERC, and the Canadian Institute of Health Researchers, or the CIHR, are required to adhere to very specific regulations regarding the secure storage, transmission, retention of research data involving human subjects, which include anything from digital files of oral history interviews to medical data. Does the proposed solution meet the Tri-Council agency's requirements? We do not know. It's not mentioned in the IRM. Okay, and there could be other stakeholder issues which have not been identified. So, and at present, you can also see in the document that it will also benefit from a more comprehensive review process. For example, there's no rubric to explain what the low, medium, and high risks are. Now, even when I give my students grades, I explain what an A is, what a B is, what a C. There's no rubric in this document to explain that when a risk to the university is low, how that is quantified. We need much greater specificity and comprehensiveness in our risk assessments of the options available. So it's not often we can identify so close to the event itself whether something is a watershed moment in history. Historian, I know sometimes it takes a long time for that to become clear, but I have every confidence that the widespread historic significance of what Edward Snowden has revealed will be borne out in the years ahead. Those of us in functioning democracies where constitutions currently protect our rights and freedoms, including free speech, association, and privacy, must now thoughtfully take up the challenge of protecting those rights through legislative and regulatory means. And it's going to take the commitment of all of us and the expertise from sciences, the social sciences, and the humanities. I'm reminded of a slogan on a t-shirt produced by the University of Utah's School of Humanities. Science can tell you how to clone a Tyrannosaurus Rex. The humanities can tell you why they might not be such a good idea. In this era of rapid technological change, we need all the skills and knowledge now to keep the past in view and contribute to building the best e-communications solution for the University of Toronto, which likely includes advocating for increased parliamentary scrutiny of CSEC. As a historian, I would like to conclude by also recognizing this moment represents a tremendous opportunity for the University of Toronto to employ the globally recognized expertise of its faculty on this issue, frame the discussion in Canada, and take a leadership role in public education. That's the view from history.
Thank you very much. Scott, from the Faculty Association. Scott's a geographer. It's not a prefix.
It may. Are you all set?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay, thank you. Thanks to the organizers, particularly to Professor Clement for inviting me. Sorry I couldn't be here this morning. I had a family commitment, so I had to sort of split the day. But I know that some of the rest of you also had similar constraints. So, as you heard from Andrew, I'm Scott Prudhomme. I'm a professor cross-appointed between the Department of Geography and the School of the Environment. But I'm also the president of the University of Toronto Faculty Association, and it's primarily in that capacity that I'm speaking here today. And so the University of Toronto Faculty Association, UTFA. What is UTFA? Well, there are many possible answers you could get to that question around the campus, some of them more polite than others. But basically UTFA is an advocate for faculty and librarians at the U of T on matters pertaining primarily to the employment of faculty and librarians at the university. And as we're seeing today, faculty and librarians are certainly often effective at being their own advocates. Indeed, speaking up and speaking out is part of what we do as academics. UTFA, in part, and I would say in significant part, exists to support and protect that aspect of being an academic, speaking up and speaking out. But as an advocate, UTFA has some unique features. Specifically, we're a collective, independent and democratically elected and accountable advocate for faculty and librarians. And in fact, we are the only advocate that can claim those attributes at this institution, at least for the faculty and librarians we represent. Now, of course, CUPE represents faculty in a broadly parallel fashion, different subset of faculty. So for example, we are governed by a council of 60 representatives elected from constituencies across the university. And the president of UTFA, in this case myself, is elected by a vote of the approximately 3,000 members of the association, including, incidentally, about 500 retirees. So in advocating for academic staff, what is UTFA's interest in the questions that are before us today? And in this process of thinking about how we might outsource e-communications? UTFA's interest is considerable. We've been monitoring this project for some time, and I want to thank Robert Cook and his staff for keeping us up to date, including for his presentation to Council, the UTFA Council, almost 1 year ago today. The faculty and staff e-communications consultations seems now to be converging on a specific recommendation regarding migration to Microsoft Office 365, which, as Lisa, I think, or Heidi, sorry, pointed out, is actually not just about email, but a whole suite of communication technologies and practices. And in that context, we're hearing more and more questions and concerns from colleagues. Most recently, UTFA has initiated a dialogue with the Provost's office, hoping to convey our questions and concerns and to articulate and uphold certain principles in the administration of e-communications. So I want to say something about that now. Now there are PowerPoint slides. I wonder, are those going up or?
We're going to load them up later.
Oh, so they don't see them?
They won't be seen.
Okay, that's okay. I should have asked you about that, but that's okay. In explaining the general character of our concerns, I want to start with a question that I think Jim Turk from CAUT has already addressed to some extent. And again, I apologize for being late. So why is the management or administration of email and e-communications more generally for academic staff important in a university, specifically this one? Oh, they're not. That's actually. Why is the management or administration of email and e-communications or academic records more generally for academic staff important in a university, and specifically this one? And what does it have to do with employment? Or put differently, if UTFA represents academic staff primarily in their capacity as employees of the university, why would we be on about this and not stick to things like salaries or pensions? Are academic staff even employees? Well, just to be clear, UTFA is on about salaries and pensions, don't worry about that. But email and e-communications more generally are woven into the fabric of what we do as academic staff in our work for the university. And in turn, academic staff, in doing their work, are essential to carrying out the research and teaching missions of the university itself. Indeed, without the work of faculty and librarians in undertaking teaching, research, and scholarly activities, as well as professional and creative ones, there simply is no university. Of course, we work with other staff, with students, and with the administrative apparatus of the institution, but as academic staff, we're at the heart of what this place is, and actually at the heart of the very idea of what this place is all about. So I've spoken about the mission and purpose of the university. What are those? I want to read you the mission and purpose statements of the U of T, and I think they're quite pertinent to this conversation, starting with the mission statement. The University of Toronto is committed to being an internationally significant research university with undergraduate, graduate, and professional programs of excellent quality. Fair enough, a bit apple pie, none of us would argue with that, but the purpose statement is a bit more interesting, I think, in this context. Let me read you that statement, and it's longer. Quote, "The University of Toronto is dedicated to fostering an academic community in which the learning and scholarship of every member may flourish, with vigilant protection for individual human rights and a resolute commitment to the principles of equal opportunity, equity, and justice. Within the unique university context, the most crucial of all human rights are the rights of freedom of speech, academic freedom, and freedom of research. And we affirm that these rights are meaningless unless they entail the right to raise deeply disturbing questions and provocative challenges to the cherished beliefs of society at large and of the university itself. It is this human right to radical, critical teaching and research with which the university has a duty above all to be concerned, for there is no one else, no other institution, and no other office in our modern liberal democracy which is the custodian of this most precious and vulnerable right of the liberated human spirit." Unquote. So what does this have to do with email and e-communications? Well, we all know that electronic records and electronic communications have become increasingly important as both content but also context for the work of academic staff. We use electronic media to deliver lectures, to supplement lectures, to provide readings to students, to facilitate discussion among students, etc. And we use electronic media to communicate with colleagues and collaborators locally and around the world in the context of undertaking scholarly, creative, and professional work. In order for academic staff to be able to undertake that work in a manner that upholds the mission and purpose of the university, and in order to uphold academic freedom in particular, important formal and customary rights must be upheld in the administration of all academic records and communications related to the work of academic staff. Surely we cannot have academic freedom if we are being routinely and surreptitiously monitored in our activities, including, but not only, by our own administration. Now, Heidi already gave us some examples of how colleagues may be affected in their teaching and research if the privacy of their records are compromised. But I want to focus in this respect for now not on Microsoft or any other third party, but actually on the relationship between faculty and librarians on the one hand and the university administration on the other, because after all, it's the university administration that will be party to any contract with a third party vendor. So suppose, for instance, that my research and teaching involved critique of university policies, for example, in the commercialization and patenting of research discoveries. And in that context, suppose that the dean or the provost, without my consent or knowledge, monitored my email correspondence or other records in order to learn about and gain evidence of these activities and to intervene to try to get me to stop doing what I'm doing, or worse, to censor me. This is a fictional, though not entirely unimaginable circumstance. For the integrity of the institution itself to be upheld, I hope we can all agree this simply cannot be allowed to happen. The mere threat of it happening, again, as Heidi mentioned, if credible, undermines free, independent, and critical inquiry and thus erodes academic freedom. Academic staff simply must have reasonable rights to privacy in undertaking what they do, and they must have reasonable rights to control access to their records and their communications, electronic and otherwise, in order to enjoy academic freedom. Moreover, and I won't go into detail on this, there are issues of the administration of intellectual property of academic staff as well. And the terms of these rights and protections are primarily, first and foremost, governed by the relationship between faculty and librarians as employees and their employer. So this is my first general point in speaking to what is UTFA's stake in this conversation. UTFA, to repeat, advocates for the well-being of academic staff, specifically as employees of this university. And the administration of records and communications belonging to and originating from academic staff is actually one important aspect of the terms and conditions of employment for academic staff. To put it slightly differently, academic staff as employees are a special case. Now I know, pejoratively or otherwise, few here would dispute that faculty are special. Now, believe me, I know how special our colleagues can sometimes be. But in all seriousness, faculty and librarians are a special case of employee, so much so that many of them actually do not think of themselves as employees at all. While it is trivially true that we work for the university and are paid to do so, many of our colleagues will and do object to being called employees. And while I think this is woefully naive and inaccurate, there's a certain kernel of insight in that sentiment. Specifically, and again referring to the mission and the purpose of the U of T, the relationship between academic staff as employees on the one hand and the institution and its administration as employers on the other must reflect and reinforce the statements in the mission statement and the purpose statement. And that has implications for the administration and management of records and communications, including e-communications. Now, what is the landscape then of policy and practice at U of T? Are academic staff under routine surveillance? Not to my knowledge. Do transgressions sometimes occur? I think they do, yes, even if guided by the best of intentions. You may want to consider, for instance, that the Provost Office recently, in complying with the terms of the contract with Access Copyright to generate data on the practices of faculty in using copyrighted materials in their teaching. The method used involved surreptitious sampling and analysis of the posting of electronic materials on course websites in the university's Blackboard e-teaching system. Individual course instructors were not outed in the analysis, so anonymity was preserved, I want to be clear. But neither were those instructors notified if their courses were being used as part of the sample for the analysis. And to me, this simply cannot happen, even if the consequences are benign. Even at great universities, practices can slip. Many of you will recall that just last year at Harvard University, the Office of the Dean of Undergraduate Studies conducted surreptitious searches of email accounts, including those of some faculty, in the context of an investigation into allegations of widespread cheating by students. Specifically and disturbingly, the searches of faculty email accounts were initiated in an effort not to investigate the cheating, but rather to learn the origin of leaks to the media about the investigation of the cheating. Quoting from the New York Times coverage of the story, it was revealed that university administrators hunting for the sources of those leaks had searched through our Harvard email accounts of 16 resident deans who are junior faculty members, live in the student houses, and act as student advisors. Most of the resident deans were not told of the searches until months later, unquote. The undergraduate dean subsequently resigned, albeit claiming that the resignation had nothing to do with the scandal. At the U of T, as we must consider the possible implications of outsourcing, and we first have to examine the existing context, and we are vulnerable. We do not have much by way of formal language to protect against this sort of thing, the sort of thing, for instance, that happened at Harvard. Again, I'm not saying it happens all the time. The question is, could it happen, and what are the protections against it happening, and how does that shape the context in which we're examining the questions surrounding outsourcing? What we do have, in addition to formal language, though, is a set of cultural norms and expectations, as well as goodwill and customary rights. We also have general language and academic freedom in the Memorandum of Agreement that prescribes UTFA's role in representing faculty and librarians. The Academic Freedom Clause, which is Article 5 of the current memorandum, specifically precludes censorship, and it's far-reaching to be sure, but it's not specific enough on privacy and control of access to records and communications. At present, UTFA and the Governing Council are in the process of revising and modernizing the Memorandum of Agreement. The goal is to bring the relationship of the parties and the role of UTFA into the modern era. It's high time for this sort of house cleaning, and in that context, we at UTFA have proposed new language on privacy, monitoring, and surveillance. And I want to quote from what we've proposed. And I'm sorry that this is a kind of a lengthy quote. I intended to be able to put this up for you, but this is what we've proposed to insert into the new memorandum, and I'll just read it to you. The Governing Council agrees that faculty members and librarians have an expectation of privacy in the workplace, consistent with Article 5 of the memorandum. In particular, the Governing Council acknowledges that, as has been the long-standing practice at the university, informed by the principle of academic freedom, members have a right to privacy in their communications and files, including all records pertaining to teaching, research, and service, whether in paper or electronic form, and the parties undertake to respect this right to the fullest extent possible. To that end, the Governing Council shall not inspect a member's paper files or engage in electronic monitoring or other scrutiny of any mass storage devices of a faculty member's computer, internet, phone, photocopier data, or email usage in a manner that in any way divulges either to the governing council or a third party the contents of the paper files or electronic files or data, subject to the limitations set out below. And then there's a series of provisions outlining the circumstances under which this could happen, including complying with the law or with the court order. And I won't read you all that language. But the point is that this language is not in the memorandum now, and there's no language like this anywhere in the university. So this language, we feel, reflects the expectations most of us have, but there's no language that actually guarantees this anywhere. And that is a product of the fact that the Memorandum of Agreement has fallen out of step with language that we see at other universities. So what does this all have to do with the proposed migration to Microsoft Office 365? Well, in general terms, any contract with a third-party vendor to administer and otherwise manage e-communications has the potential to alter the relationship that academic staff have with the institution in ways that could undermine the formal and customary rights of academic staff. UTFA does not share the questions and concerns being, UTFA does share the questions and concerns being raised about what difference it might make whether or not that third-party vendor is a domestic or international entity. And you've been hearing a lot about that. I won't elaborate on it. But most fundamentally, it seems obvious that the legal and political resources of both institutions and individuals who wish to contest the monitoring or other use of their communications will be shaped by the jurisdiction from which they do so. In addition, however, those resources will be shaped by the specific terms of the contract with the third-party vendor, and we have yet to see that contract. Now, I'm not saying that UTFA is opposed to the migration of email or other e-communications to a third-party Microsoft Office 365 or otherwise. We've not taken that step, although we may. We've not been officially consulted on this, although it would be our position that the terms and conditions of employment for academic staff, including those pertaining to administration of records and communications, may not be changed unilaterally by the Governing Council of the University of Toronto, or indeed by other arms of the administration. But I will conclude with some questions that UTFA has for the Provost's office as well as for the E-Communications Committee and indeed for the entire university community. First, it does not appear as though the committee in charge of advising on the outsourcing is considering any options other than the status quo or a migration to Microsoft Office 365. We would like to know whether this is the case, and if so, to understand why no other options, particularly domestic vendors, are being considered. Secondly, how is the committee and the Provost's office taking note of the different options that U of T and individual faculty and librarians would have to document and contest any government monitoring of faculty and librarian correspondence, depending on the nation in which any potential third-party vendor is based and the terms of that third party's relationship to specific national governments? Third, has the committee reviewed the draft terms of the contract with Microsoft, and will that draft contract be made available to UTFA and to the wider academic community? To repeat here, we are opposed to any unilateral change in the existing terms and conditions of employment for academic staff, including, but not only, those pertaining to the administration of records and communications belonging to our members. And so fourth, specifically, has the committee and the Provost's office taken account of the possible implications of any arrangement with a third-party vendor regarding administration and management of email and other electronic communications and records, given the formal and customary rights that faculty and librarians have to control access to those records, the ones that they generate in the context of doing their academic and professional work? And has the committee and also the Provost's office taken similar account of the rights that pertain to intellectual property over similar such records? So these are the questions that we have, and I thank you again for the invitation and the opportunity to speak today, and look forward to more discussion. Thank you.
And our last speaker today is Walt Sang with the United Steelworkers Local 1998. So, please.
Is this on here? Okay. I was wondering why people were actually asking me to come and speak, and I figured it must be because in all email history, I'm the luckiest guy in the world because I've won several $100 million via email. So not just once, but dozens of times. So I've got to be the world's luckiest email person. That's why, perhaps part of the reason why you've invited me. Although I'm not the most trusting, so I've never really given that $1,000 administrative fee they asked for or disclosed my bank account information. So while the luckiest, I'm not the most trustful. I guess I'd like to touch upon a few things. As the United Steelworkers Local 1998 at the University of Toronto, we represent 7,000 staff people across the university in all three campuses, several hundred IT people, and several dozen IT people that provide the institutional email. A few concerns that I have, just as a flag, is the process of how this is occurring, the decision-making process, consultation process. Also, I'll touch a bit about the people, the actual people involved in the delivery of the service, and then maybe lastly the union's interest and how we see ourselves in this decision-making process and consultation process. I guess I'll keep it short because we've actually not been involved in the consultation process. You would think that the people who actually deliver the service would be one. What do you think? And that's fine. And that's good. And with collegial activities and things like that, our staff will participate on committees and consultations and advisory boards, so on and so forth. But at some point, between the blue sky, what do you think? What do you know? Let's explore some options to the we're outsourcing and these are the layoffs and this is how it's going to impact your position and you're laid off. Somewhere within that continuum of consultation and decision making, there's a contractual obligation that the university has with the steelworkers as the union, and they have to consult. Article 12 says that if there's going to be an organizational change or a layoff, that you have to consult with the union to actually talk about, even within the continuum. If you don't know the positions, you don't know the actual layoffs, you have to talk about the ideas. These are the units that are impacted. This is the potential impact that it's going to have on your members. And that's a contractual, a legal obligation that the university has. And I'll cite, without sort of boring people with articles of the collective agreement, I think that the most important article that I could find is Article 12-14. That no employee who has successfully completed his or her probationary period shall be laid off as a direct result of contracting out. So perhaps, if I were a more trusting person, I would say that the university has not consulted the union because they have absolutely no expectation that there's going to be any job loss whatsoever. So perhaps in their minds, their vision, their thinking, we're going to save over $1 million by outsourcing this institutional email. But without any staff impact, there's not going to be one job loss at all. So maybe electricity or servers or something else, air conditioning or something else. Maybe they've done the cost-benefit analysis on that end. But certainly, if there's going to be any contracting out of staff, they should consult, and we would actually have a legal right to prevent that from happening. So certainly in terms of the process, that's a decision-making process. There's a continuum of consultation and decision-making, which the union the university has a legal obligation to actually consult with the union. And we would have legal recourse to actually block any contracting out that would result in the loss of staff. I guess touch upon the people. Certainly there are definitely advantages of having in-house talent. Even if you have a 2-year contract with Microsoft and you're going to test the waters, how are you going to scale that down? And how are you going to scale it back up in the event that it doesn't work out? We have extremely experienced staff, dedicated staff that have been here, some of them many dozens, decades, in fact. And how do you actually, IT is probably the most difficult place for recruitment and retention of staff people. So if you're going to lay off dozens of staff, after 2 years, do you call them up after they've gone elsewhere? Maybe you're paying them as consultants or something. But how do you recruit the IT people back in the event that you actually make a mistake? So within the decision-making and consultation process, the union can actually say, which unit is affected, what are the positions, and what are the cost-benefit analysis of letting these people go? Certainly, you don't have a legal right to let these people go, but what are your obligations in terms of that service? The provision of service. I've won another $200 million. It's like every time a bell rings, Paul's won $200 million via email. So that's the people aspect, and also the accountability. Certainly the U of T hires people, they're USW members, you give them a job description with a certain set of duties and responsibilities, but also accountability in that respect. If a supervisor or someone else tasks a staff person to do something, the person can say, well, that's not my job description, that's immoral, that's unethical, I'm not going to do this data mining or invasive whatsoever thing on someone's email, and they would call up the union and we could give them advice and representation in that respect to sort of say, well, you do have to do it if your supervisor directs you to do it, but you also have a right to grieve that, to sort of say, is this within your job description? Is this a contravention of university policies? Is this a contravention of any legislative protections, privacy legislations? So on and so forth. So there's a level of accountability, right? If you have a staff person, you can actually direct them to do something, direct them not to do something, and if they contravene that, direct things, you can actually discipline them, you can meet with them, you can talk with them. You actually know who they are. They're colleagues, they're friends, they're just down the hall or in another building. If you outsource it, what's the level of accountability? Who is actually directing someone? Who is actually overseeing that work. So I guess I'll just end with that in terms of the union concerns and processes. You know, if the university feels that they can have cost savings by outsourcing, you know, without any job loss, then that's certainly a possibility, but we do need to have that conversation. And another document, when they outsourced the student emails, they said there's going to be absolutely no job loss. And the FAQ, it says, would anyone lose their job? And the answer is, the intent is that no one would lose their job. I guess the intent, actuality. The project would free up people resources by relieving them of a mundane task to be redeployed to do other important tasks for their faculty, department, or unit. Wow, that's interesting. Isn't it heartwarming to have an employer that would free us up of mundane tasks so that we could do more important stuff? So while I might be the luckiest person, I'm not the most trustful person, so I definitely will want to meet with the university. We've put out the request to meet. The university says they know nothing about this, and they're going to look into it on their end. So I guess maybe in a week or two from now, I would have more questions, or would have more answers to your questions. But right now, they've not consulted with the union, as is their legal requirement, and they can't contract out jobs through outsourcing. Okay. I'm taking the employer's word for that there wasn't any. I guess I'll have to look into it.
Was that before your term?
Yeah.
So we have some time for discussion. What I would like to do is have our panelists come up to the front. Melissa, can we turn the camera? Because what I'd like to do is have people sit on the chairs if they feel so want to do that, and just have a conversation.
Sure, I'll get
So if you could,
this is everywhere, or just
well, whoever wants. Actually,
I just have a follow-up directly.
Yes, I agree. So please ask your questions. The idea was that people could be visible and a little bit more conversational. Yeah.
Okay. My first question is...
One question.
Okay. Well, question for Scott was, so I'm a member of the advisory committee, and so we have, nothing's been circulated to the community itself. So you said you went through about 4 questions that you actually had. It'd be helpful if you actually sent that to the chair of the committee and Michael Luke, and ask him to circulate it to all the committee members. So this way we can be sure as the committee that if it's not asked by someone else, that we ask it on behalf of the committee. Because the 2 thing you asked is, has the committee seen a draft of the contract? No. We haven't seen it, and we haven't seen the output concerns either. So within the last few days, if you did send something, we haven't seen
So I haven't said it yet. I was reading questions from a draft letter to the Provost's office, but I was planning to CC the committee with that. So
and making a specific request, I think that it be sure that the concerns are expressed directly to the committee.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I forgot to add that in my remarks that the Department of History had a meeting on Monday, and Wednesday. This past week it was actually an agenda item. We actually passed a motion. The department's going to write a letter, faculty are going to sign, recommending postponement of a more rigorous assessment process. And then some of the points I actually brought forward today, actually from the discussion with colleagues. And I know that the Department of Ecology is meeting next week, and this is on their agenda as well. So there is. Departmental level, I think faculty and concern is, and faculty is talking about it now.
Right, and we're hearing that.
And it was all, really, the town hall was the first clue that,
Right.
That, well, for most of us, that we can put this on the radar.
So this ends in the case of, Seamus, do you want to answer?
I just want to add one thing with what Mike said. If you have a draft letter, you should try to circulate that to other chairs.
Yeah.
In arts and sciences and other faculties, probably by initially having a conversation with them about it, so that they could make it easier for them to get a letter off.
Sure, I'll tell my chair. First,
I hate to have to the cameras on when I say this. I'm certain that if the letters come from the chair, it's going to carry a lot more weight than the letter comes from Scott. I think that
Thanks for saying that.
if it's on the ground grassroots, it's going to carry a lot.
Seamus, we are on the ground and grassroots, I can guarantee you that.
But anyway, I'll bring that to my chair's attention for sure.
It would be really, really valuable for us.
Just to add to that point, within the faculty of information, we outsourced our poll taking to Doodle and to ask how people felt within the faculty about the possibility. This was some weeks ago before the recent risk management report, but we have approximately 26 or 27 faculty members. 24 opposed it, and there were no objections. There was no 24 opposed the move, and there were no people indicated in favor. So virtually unanimous concern about this proposal. So, Ian.
Right, so for those who don't know me, I'm Ian Goldberg. I'm a professor of computer science at the University of Waterloo. And
It has some fame in the graphic service.
not a photographer, but I play one on
You want the crypto? I don't know.
Okay.
Right, so the reason I'm here is my attention was drawn to this. Waterloo is currently considering, the current issue is outsourcing of expense claims and reimbursements to a US company. And unlike the situation with email, where, as it was pointed out, email is not really secure to begin with, and the question is, with outsourcing email, that a different set of people have access to email. With expense claims, whereas before it was completely in-house and there's no reason to believe your travel, your financial, your banking data would leave campus, this is a big deal if you send it to the US. I found some of your remarks, especially your position on how do you say it, that this would be changing the terms of employment of faculty members. I think that's a very interesting take on this. And I assume the staff would have a similar position. I don't know if you have this, but you mentioned your memorandum of agreement, and you would have a union agreement, a collective agreement, right? And presumably it says something similar about not unilaterally changing your terms of employment. Right? So that's certainly something I think about mentioning to Waterloo people. But I have a kind of meta question for Andrew, which is so this thing is all about the perils of outsourcing e-services. Yet it's hosted on Google Docs, right? So basically you're outsourcing to this US company the metadata about anyone who's interested in this topic.
Right.
So why did you choose Google Docs to host this?
Out of convenience, of course, familiarity. I would make a distinction, and I'd be happy to discuss this because I wonder this myself, and perhaps others do. At what point do you get off things that you have some concerns about? In this case, this is a public event. I intend that everything should be public. The participation can be pseudonymous, as far as I'm concerned. And that would be, so you could look at it, presumably, without having to expose your identity. And I'm not sure to what degree technically that is it's actually supported in practice. But I go to the United States all the time. I don't have, I'm prepared to offer at least basic information about myself to this. So I don't want to withdraw completely. And I actually want to insist that some of us can, those of us who are, tenured positions, should be able to use these media openly without fear. That isn't true for everybody. And I make a distinction between what I'm doing myself and in sort of convening this event, than from an institution which has a fiduciary responsibility, particularly when it's required of students and faculty.
Absolutely, but I think you're maybe missing one twist, which is it's not your information you're revealing by putting this on Google Docs. It's everyone who visits that doc, right? All the other people who might be interested, their meta information is now stored in Google.
Well, to what extent is that the case? Is anonymous reading? There's no need to sign in. IP addresses would be captured by this,
right.
And
cookies. The Google cookie for most people uniquely identifies them, right? So Google will capture their Google cookie.
If that's how it works, yes. I don't know that particular aspect of it. But what would you suggest? Did you think that we should move off these platforms completely? Or can we use them to have a discussion? I don't know of better ones for doing this.
Seamus is back. Yeah.
No, I have a different question.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Okay.
So what do you think?
So,
Casper, do you want to?
So a couple of things. One, directly bearing on that. When I left Microsoft, I had basically 20 years of work in proprietary formats that took about 6 months to get off onto free formats, and I had to convert 20 gigabytes of personal email from Outlook to Thunderbird, which is non-trivial. Most companies are doing that break at sort of things of that size. But also, I did a kind of survey, just sort of Googling, of what free software platforms are available for the kind of cloud services that, in fact, small enterprises need, probably university scale. And there are some. I mean, there's actually a thing in Brazil. There's a couple actually in Latin America. There's some in Germany, and there may be one in Canada, but there's maybe like 10, not very many, that are viable options that I could find. So in terms of coming up with practical counter-proposals, and I think that may be where it comes down to, is if your sort of IT management hierarchies are now well down this road, someone's going to have to kind of kick a counter-proposal into play. So there needs to be some kind of surveying of what possible counter-proposal could be, and where that could come from. I would strongly recommend that is based on a free software stack. The other thing, not really related to that, but going back to what I said this morning, and the way in which this very broad definition of foreign intelligence information has these political clauses, political spying clauses. And I said that nothing had been written about this in the policy literature for 40 years. However, I did mention, there wasn't time, that there is one law firm called Hogan Lovells that has essentially been fronting, particularly for US commercial interests, and they have produced essentially pseudo-legal papers. They look like law papers and scholarship, but when you poke at them in the footnotes, they fall to pieces. They did one last year, which is essentially saying, each country has pretty much equivalently blatant laws which allow sort of spying, but they sort of abracadabra away this international risk, which I mentioned, that your rights are not equivalent when your data goes into a particular US jurisdiction. However, they did come back with a riposte, I think probably because of my work, around June this year, and it was specifically looking at Pfizer. And it was actually trying to do an analysis of Pfizer and then do comparative analysis in respect of those mass surveillance laws. So there was a footnote. There was a footnote which said, when you go back to the congressional record and the original Pfizer debate in 1978, and you look in the congressional debate, then there is a paragraph where a government speaker from that time said, oh yes, there is some concern that this clause might be used for surveillance of business and economic information, and indeed academic research information. And of course, this could never possibly happen. This is not the intention of the legislation. Full stop. So what Hogan Lovells did when they wrote that paper is they committed the absolutely academically inexcusable sin of truncating the quotation. Because when you go back to the original quotation in the record, what I just said is followed by 4 Americans. So there is this highly accepted paper out there, you may encounter it, and if you come across footnote 12, be aware that they have done this essentially pure deception by truncating that quote. So when you go back to the record, I believe, I haven't found any reassurance whatsoever that if you're not an American, that as an academic you have any immunity to this at all. I just want to make that point.
So, I mean, to Ian's point, I mean, I think it's a concern for many of us. How, particularly now in light of Snowden, do we adjust our own practices around communication, publishing our material, holding sort of collaborations? And
your university provides you with web space locally, I'm sure, right? You don't have to put all your documents on Google Docs. You have a website, right?
But it doesn't have the same affordances, particularly to do this quickly. And in a way, it is a reflection of my own lack of other practices, that when I came up with this and I wanted to do it quickly, then that's what I went to. And I'd be interested to hear from people whether they think that's a concern and what to do about it. I realize that there's a question here in terms of the discrepancy between the overall concern about the university taking this potential route with Microsoft or other companies and what we do ourselves. And I don't think I'm exposing people to this risk to the same degree, in the sense that partly it's voluntary, and partly people have other ways of getting around it. I've offered for people to email me directly, these sorts of things. So I don't know.
Right, it's certainly not the same thing. I just thought that there was an interesting parallel.
Well, I agree. I agree, and it's a dilemma. It's a genuine dilemma here.
Yeah, no, but your dilemma is the university's dilemma writ small, right?
Yes.
The university has the same dilemma. We want to do something that's convenient and that seems to make sense, and they're weighing the pros and the cons. And you decided that Google Docs was the way to go, and the university seems to be deciding that Office 365 is the way to go. And you may think they're wrong, and I may think you're wrong.
Sure.
Right? And then Kat may say, oh, but
there are
some
differences here in terms of
Sure.
scale,
Yeah, no, absolutely.
time frame,
Absolutely.
and one-offs, and making pedagogical points, and all sorts of stuff. Seamus, do you want to weigh in as a comment?
But I really actually like to go back to something that came up a moment ago about the fact that in outsourcing email, we're changing the terms of employment of the employees in the university. Because if that is the case, that could be a very compelling argument. I'm very familiar with a lot of these documents, probably nowhere near as Scott. If you could unpack for me why you think that it's changing the terms of employment, I find it very helpful.
Well,
because it's not in any contracts that I know. Email is not discussed in any of the provincial guidance on behavior, about promotions or tenure.
this was part of what I was trying to explain in the talk. Let me go over it again. I was saying that as academics, the form of communication, the records that we generate, whether they're electronic or paper or otherwise, that we have certain rights over them. So for instance, if I have a file and a course I'm teaching, actually this happened this year, I'll give you a concrete example. There's a colleague, I won't name the department, who was accused of making inaccurate claims in an expense submission. And someone from the governing counsel's office who looks into these things and audits and whatnot said, well, I'm just going to come to your office and get the records. No. Okay. It may not be written down somewhere that that person can't do that, but in fact those records belong to us in some measurable respect. They also belong to the institution. They're shared. But it's an expectation, and I think a well-founded expectation that most academics have, that the records of whatever kind that they generate in the context of doing their work, they have to have some control over those. Now, as I tried to say in the talk, there's not, actually you're right, there's not a lot of language on this. It's just understood, but it doesn't make it any less real. In the same way, for instance, in 2010, when there was a lot of controversy on the campus about academic planning in the Faculty of Arts and Science, and a lot of uproar about the manner in which it's been done, you can't go and look up a policy saying this is what collegiality really means in the context of academic planning, but all of us have some understanding of what it means. And when you stray too far outside the boundaries of that, you can actually make a case that it was done inappropriately. There are legal experts here who can comment on the difference between formal and informal law, or customary rights and formal rights. So what I was saying is that there's a vulnerability in this aspect of our terms of employment as academics because there isn't good policy. We do have the mission and purpose statement, and the mission clearly, the purpose statement does talk about the need to uphold the right to engage in free, independent, critical inquiry, including of the institution. But I would argue to give force to that, it has implications in terms of control over the records that we generate in our teaching, our research, in our professional activities, etc. I think you spoke to this in your talk, in your comments, right? So the other issue here is that, so why does it change? I don't know why or how it changes because nobody's seen the contract. All I'm saying, the inference I'm making is that if there's a relationship between faculty and the institution, I know people don't like to talk about employee, employer, but we do work for the university, and the university is our employer. It's many other things, but it's our employer. And it's hard to name the person who is the employer. It's one of the odd things about it as an employment relationship. But we work here, we get paid, and our terms and conditions of employment are not just monetary, they're also things like having control over records we generate in the context of doing our work. And that's a relationship between, ultimately between the governing council and the faculty and the librarians who work here. If the governing council then enters into an agreement with a third party over the administration of some of those records, all I'm saying is it has the potential to change that relationship, and we don't know how it changes that relationship because we don't know what's in the contract. And I think we do know from other places where they've signed a contract with Google, I think as Jim spoke about earlier, I wasn't here, but I've talked to him and I've seen his talk before, and we also know from things that other people are saying that there's good reason to believe that that relationship is going to be changed rather fundamentally by this contract, but we're at a disadvantage because nobody, including apparently people in the committee, has seen the contract. That's all I'm trying to say. I hope that's more clear.
Yeah, but I think about how it changed the relationship, and this goes takes us back to the town hall when faculty expressed concern about the system, and CIO Cook was here this morning said, well, you know, the idea would be that you could opt out as an individual faculty member, or you could opt out as a department. In fact, we would expect computer science, since they already have their own email servers, they still have their own accounts, maybe, you know, we wanted to opt out faculty departments. But what this does by moving to the United States, and from my department raises concern, is that for those of us who think we should opt out, the admin staff aren't going to have a choice. They're all going to be on this system. So if I want to communicate with research services about proprietary research, I've got to do human resource and ethics reviews with the Office the research ethics application. Am I going to do that on my computer, print it out, march it over, make them agree that they cannot scan this and circulate this PDF thing through the Office 365 system? They now have to maintain paper copies. I mean, this creates an incredible inefficiencies, or potential incredible inefficiencies.
We got to find a better example.
Of what?
For this particular argument, it's a very solid argument, because the RAISE system is going to introduce, going to add protocols to the management of records about grants, so they won't be distributed alone by email.
Sorry, who's going to do this? Or?
RAISE, it's a university initiative to develop a it's research, research administration, something. It's when you apply for a SURE grant.
Right.
You should increasingly department faculties are opting for the RAISE system, where you upload it, you get a message.
Yeah.
They're going to do the same thing with protocols,
Oh.
the ethics protocols.
Right.
So they're going to take, that's going to take it out. It's a very good argument, right?
There are many other things,
But
right?
we
If I
need some
want
other
to, yeah,
examples.
I see what you're saying,
We need
that
one.
they recognize an
Because
email as
what's
fundamentally
gonna happen
insecure.
is we get this
Yeah,
privacy
yeah.
and your own message.
But you can think of other
Right.
places
Well,
on
we have-
points on campus. Good
And
point,
that's
thank you
a
for that.
Other good arguments.
But where you wouldn't want to have that happen, right? And again, that it's also this message that if we are told as faculty, your research is a particular level of sensitivity that can't be exposed to risks in the United States, so now you have as a faculty member, have to have the initiative and onus to go out and research and locate a separate service to provide this, and then where's our digital university, right? Where's our university of the 21st century? It's pieces parts, and that doesn't seem very good.
Can I go back and say one other thing, just about the question, James, you asked about the existing relationship, and I talked about customary rights and whatnot, but I want to sort of finish that point, because if you feel like I was bringing in a bunch of things that are extraneous to the conversation, the language we proposed, the revision of the memorandum of privacy and whatnot, my point was that, you know, our position, at least as an association, is that the customary rights, the sort of general rules that we have, are not enough. One of the reasons they're not enough is because of this changing landscape, and this whole conversation is a symptom of that changing landscape, and we're far behind the times in terms of developing policy language at the university to govern this relationship. And so we drafted this language in anticipation not of this specific question, should the University of Toronto should it not outsource e-communications with Microsoft Office 365, but in general, if we're going to have third parties involved in the administration of records, electronic or otherwise, then what language do we have to make sure, you know, there's this really important question, and at least this is part of what you're interested in as well, how, and other people too, what difference does it make whether you're in Canada or the US? I guess what I'm also saying is it also makes a difference as individual faculty and librarians, what rights you have to contest something that you think is inappropriate by upholding the rights you have as an employee of the university to then force the institution to advocate on your behalf for the administration of those records. Because as soon as you insert a third party, it's three parties. And so it's the relationship between all three parties that matters. And I just focused on the one that I think maybe we also need to be thinking more about, which is the relationship we each have as individuals and within our academic units, within the context of the university itself.
I had a quick question about language, actually, and your use of the word "my computer." You know, when I started my faculty, the first thing I got was a computer. I don't think it's my computer. It's the department computer. In fact, when I leave, if I were to leave that department, that computer is going to stay. And I know what's going to happen, because I've seen it happen. They will apply to IT to get it unlocked, my passwords, access to my files. So as an employee,
They'll access your files?
they can if they want to, yes.
It's only a place of admin.
Yeah.
It isn't a fact.
We have to
Faculty, we sign off all their equipment to them when they get out, right? All the faculty left here to sign off all their equipment.
That's a great example of a sort of an expectation, but whether that's actually written down, because I'm surprised Jim didn't talk about this as one of his favorite examples. Did you mention this, Jim? So he talks about how, when I said faculty and librarians are special as employees, this is one of the concrete ways that they're special. It's understood. A lot of people in the workplace, if they're fired or if they leave, whatever, they don't take all that stuff with them. It belongs to the employer. But for academics, there's an expectation that a lot of it actually belongs to us. When you take a job at another university, you may not take the computer, but you take everything in it with you because it belongs to you as long as it's a record that you generated in the context of your work. As a faculty association, if someone were, you know, terminated, you know, if they did fail to get tenure, if they didn't get their renewal, or if they took a job somewhere else, and then the institution or in whatever guise tried to say, we're going to keep your records, and they came to us and said they can't do that, can they? We would say no, and we would fight that. But
That's if they get to that point.
If they get to that point, but it's not totally clear, actually, as far as I know. It's not written down anywhere that this is what belongs to who, and this is what belongs to me.
And as far as I know, and correct me if I'm wrong, Tim, it's in the research grants when I buy equipment using research money, it says it's university equipment.
Okay, so when
The hardware belongs to them. They're going to steal the laptop.
When the ATRC moved from this university to OCAD, it was quite clear that the resources that had gone into purchasing the equipment, that group, were resources that would be transferred with that group to OCAD. There was no question about the fact that that was purchased. And that money, that was, most of that was purchased with research grants. So I think Scott's absolutely right. There's a general perception, and I tested out all the limitations of this, and I signed all, I can't remember the details, it was 5 years ago now. I signed all kinds of documents to make that happen. But it was considered to be a right. We just had to make sure we went through all the channels and have the paperwork for the auditors correct. But there was no, when faculty leave, they take their stuff. Especially at a lot of PR grants, things like that. Maybe Helen must have worked there.
No, I'm not.
Are there other questions for our panelists? Because, well, there's lots of ideas that were presented. Hearing none at this point, and of course we could ask questions later. What I would suggest we use the last bit of time, and officially I put on the schedule until 4 o'clock, but I think we'll end before then. So the last topic was, where do we go from here? What sense do we make of the discussion we've heard, the important insights, the challenges to the specific idea of the proposal by the administration? So what do we do about that? And I say we, speaking I guess mainly as a faculty member, but I see a number of others who are in a similar position, but also because these issues recur in other institutions. There's a wider audience here for whatever U of T does, and so I would like to open up that discussion and hear what people think. If the university is going to explore another route besides going with Office 365, is there a possibility that Canadian universities, this is a bit ambitious, but I'll just throw this out there, stimulate some reaction, that Canadian universities, maybe in Ontario, get together and develop their own platforms that meet many of these, the criteria that we're looking for. That seems to be within our technical, intellectual capability. It's probably within our financial capability if we were to give it some degree of priority, because the cost, as we heard from Roger saying earlier, I mean, $3 to $5 a year per student when they're paying $5,000, or no, more than that, $9,000 in many cases. That doesn't seem to be a significant expense to support something that would have, I'd say, a dramatically better, at least legal position and a practical position in terms of securing emails and other communications, and also it would be a form of leadership of the university that I think would be well within the mandate of our institution to provide some kind of direction for dealing with the transformation of our infrastructure to digital media and to dealing with the NSA and other state surveillance. I mean, so there's a challenge there. I think our institutions are certainly well capable of this. And how would that work? Is there a will to do that?
I can answer that directly. There is a will. Actually, Orion did actually propose that service to granted enough, it was probably the wrong folks inside of universities, and I know BCNet was proposing that as well too.
Yeah.
It is the natural space for it to be, and in fact, when we turned up our service, we made sure it was connected, and most of our universities are connected over Orion to it. There's significant economies of scale and serviceability behind that, especially when we talk about things like voice communications and video communications that are over that network, because it is free to the universities. So our take on it was we should be on that network and deliver across that, got all the clearances to put that service on there. So that pathway has been cleared by a lot of the work we did a number of years back. and it's still there. And they did want to turn that out to service. So one of the recommendations I was going to make is exactly what you just said.
Oh, okay, we did not collaborate on this.
Yeah, do pursue that. It's there. We also talked to Canary about whether we could actually utilize DR services across the different networks, and they said absolutely doable as well too. So when you put that together, you've got the...
Thanks.
Yes,
Moment over there.
Yeah, so Canary reaches across the country. So yeah, they're all open to doing this. It's just that the pathway to the right people, or maybe it's just timing, because a lot of this conversation we're having 4 years ago are now coming to light. It's certainly doable, and there's a lot of support within the community outside of this.
So fine disaster recovery for those of us. You mean like where we have our server and we do just the same thing that Microsoft does by shipping data, mirrored on 3 continents. We do it at 3 different locations. It's big data centers across Canada.
Absolutely, and it can be housed on the universities itself. For example, as well, we use Orion to do all of their DR services.
And Orion is
the Ontario University Research Network. It's a free network that connects every higher ed institution. They use to back up all of your systems across the internet. Oh, well, it's not an internet, it's actually a private network.
Yeah.
So it's giant bandwidth.
With things like Scholars Portal, which is run out of the library here, there's a lot of experience built with how to introduce institutional collaborations in Ontario and making them very successful.
So one of the arguments, I guess, for starting on the committee was that the students are already on Microsoft. So I think that was not myself, but how it was presented to the committee. That was the first place to look because the students were already there. So the question was carry that to a point where one would decide, do you continue with that or go somewhere else? And clearly, from everything I've heard, we should clearly be looking somewhere else. But that's my personal opinion. But so the concern right now would be is how difficult is it to get the students off? And that was a comment that we had over lunch hour, and we thought we should sort of air that now because...
It is difficult. Once you've got a large collection of data, I kind of glossed over this point when I was talking about size of data and why it's really relevant. Once you have a large collection of data somewhere, it's really difficult to move. So one of the concerns I have is if you sign a 2-year contract with Microsoft, it may take longer than 2 years to get all that thing back,
Not
right?
to mention a large collection of data in proprietary form.
And never mind the proprietary format, but in fact, that kind of adds to the complexity.
And this came as a result of a conversation at lunchtime, right?
Yeah.
In the IRM, which is this document everyone should read, it gives 6 months as the time, as quoted time for how long it would take to get the data back in the event that you decided to go.
Yeah, I question that, especially in the proprietary format.
Yes.
So, few ideas. One is that in this area of privacy, human rights, and surveillance, there is, as everybody knows, enormous alignment between Canada and European Union particularly. There is similar basic legal rights, analogous jurisprudence, and the sort of surveillance situation is not, analysed based on nationality. So look for alliances also amongst continental Europe, because I think what you're dealing with, and certainly what I saw from Microsoft, is this war for mindshare for various motives. But it began around 2006, 2007. So there's a lot of catching up to do. And make no mistake that this is seen by both Google and Microsoft as an enormous strategic long-term gain. So it really is for academics to construct from their different communities a viable alternative. It's going to be down to you, working with your colleagues in other universities and even other countries, to somehow get a framework for sort of commercial viability for providing services, but also when you're making large-scale cloud services, operational excellence. You need really operational excellence, professionalism in whoever you do decide to outsource. Deciding to do everything sustainably in the university, within the university staff, that's very challenging, I think. The other thing I'd say is then you also have to consider the computers that students and faculty are using, because guess what? Microsoft has basically built their business on standards incompatibility. So you try and look at something that has been working on Live at Edu, in a free software browser, it breaks, and vice versa. If you've got a student who's still using Windows and they try and look at something, it'll break. And it doesn't break by accident. I mean, there's literally hundreds of people in Microsoft who figure out the strategy of how to engineer in standards incompatibility to have those kind of strategic and tactical effects. That is life in a big city. So be prepared for all of that and what you're taking on. It is an enormous marketing machine that has been humming away for 5 to 6 years. And that's not to discourage you. But the other thing to expect, in terms of your immediate day, is I know, in a sense, the playbook that Microsoft will apply to this. And so once there is serious ructions and discontent bubbling up, then the next item in the playbook for them to be to add a sweetener of some kind at a very high level in the university governance. So look out for your vice chancellor or whoever that is having discreet dinners with senior Microsoft people, and keep an eye out for that.
To
At that point, I just want to add, currently with Microsoft Office 365 offering, they offer you tiers of service, and our arrangement with Microsoft gives us the free tier, which gives you this card, this menu of options. And as we progress, there's the demand for the new and shiny, which implies cost. So I just want to reinforce that point that that as we move forward, there's going to eventually be a point where, oh no, we need that service, new and shiny, and we pay for it.
So what services do the students get now with Office 365?
Email contacts, calendaring, link, and some like SharePoint thing. And SkyDrive really is back to SharePoint, so it's really the same thing. But the next part to that is the next one up is more SharePoint and archiving and other features. And then after that, you get unified communications, like voice and like, and then there's B5, if you know what that is.
Once you went off that, the next one was the pay, is that correct?
Already, yes.
Yeah, you're already out the
Sorry. We, as part of the students, can students pay for it? I don't believe so at the moment, but I'm sure they're looking at it.
I saw something advertised, okay, this, I saw last week, Microsoft had some student reps in the lobby of Sydney Smith Hall, and they were offering to students that pay $79 and give you 4 years of Microsoft Office 365. So I think it's a $20 a year fee for the full features. They were showing me it was a SkyDrive and it was software too. You
right, that's what we're consumer end of the product.
Yeah, so it's not your end, right? Okay.
No, that's not what that.
But I think there was some timing, right? That then instead of using, if you were a student, at least that's how I understood it when they explained it to me. If you were a student and you were using the web to access your email on the new Microsoft side, your mail at Neutron or CA account at EDU, by paying $80, you could then get Outlook and use Outlook to.
But that, again, that's totally a separate.
My point.
The point is very simple. The point is that what's happening to Microsoft just acquired 100,000 clients that are locked into their services, to whom they can now sell, an $80 service.
Yeah.
I'm assuming that they've already been logged into the whole thing long before we.
No. What's worse is I can't collaborate with my students using Linux when they're using Microsoft because everything breaks down.
Mm-hmm.
And I've tried time and time again to use the open source software, open source this, that, and the other thing, and I have to always go back because it's either other collaborators or students that have these Microsoft products that they can't display my PowerPoints or can't do this or can't do that. And, do I make 2 separate files every time I do something?
So it's more than just sort of mind share, I think I will buy a Microsoft product, but rather it's an infrastructural lock-in that's going on, and that's the strategy. And so that would require a very deliberate alternative strategy.
But in terms of the commercial objectives, that's a tactic to deepen if you like, the likelihood of the brand lock-in succeeding. The amount of money they make is penny ante.
Oh, the only other point was that regarding the students, of course, I think this is entirely unscientific poll, but I have been asking my students since this parent that learned about Office 365 where their email data was living. This is sort of a random thing of my undergraduate classes, and almost without exception, they think the email address at mail.utoronto.ca means geographically at utoronto.ca. They do not understand that. They did not see at all that there was no, when I saw the announcements about the rollout to, over the Thanksgiving weekend to Microsoft 365, there was no mention about where the data is located. This wasn't part of the discussions, completely off their radar. And it was off the radar of my faculty as well. So when I broke the news to them that this was being planned, like jaws actually dropped. But so I think even if people are initially aware when they the live EDU rollout, the students that were consulted or agree, there's a very little information to new students who are enrolled, so that they really think we're here.
That was my point about protecting your students.
Is what, sir?
No, my last point about protecting your students. I don't think they know that.
Yeah.
And the other point of Microsoft upselling the students, that's exactly what they wanted to do, right? It's very core, and the information they glean out of those student interactions is very, very important for them on the commerce side. Forget about security for a moment, it's the commerce side. Where do you buy? How much do they buy from Amazon? That sort of information is gold in the big data world.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I guess from the student perspective here, I mean, I am a master's student in the iSchool, so I'm subjected to, I think that within the program itself, there's actually quite a bit of hot institutional, the students in general actually have quite a varied computer background. I mean, Macs are insanely popular within, for the very reason that we've been describing actually. They're pretty, I mean, look, I have two. I think that there is some, at least we are talking about my particular students, student population. They tend to be much more information or digital issues savvy, so they'll understand these issues coming out of it. So we may have more of a hardware software model called diversity within the iSchool, but I think that what you're describing is a problem among many students because they simply don't know. A lot of us know that email is not stored here. I mean, when that was actually, so there were some concerns among some student groups in the iSchool when we suddenly heard, oh, we're going to UTmail Plus. Okay, and when we first heard that, and then we were surprised when we found out it was being outsourced to Microsoft. And there were some people who were kind of thinking, oh, that's not what we signed up for email-wise. So.
Yes. I actually had your hand up for a while.
That's
Sorry,
okay.
I
I have a query on Rob's communication. Never came back to the on. Just a little footnote. I think younger folks have a completely different perception of data and what they think is proprietary data and if they care at all. And we can say we should protect the students and educate them, but I think starting off, they come from a different place than people are able to. So come back to the point that Casper raised. So here I am on this committee. It's clear that for a variety of reasons, both and teaching that it's the academic course, that Microsoft Office 365 might not be the way to go. In which case, the concept of here we have line, and we have the physical infrastructure and the networks, house the data, house the communications within Canada. But somebody would have to build a platform that is equivalent to Office 365 because it's very clear that our students want the services that Office 365 offers in terms of the size, the availability, can't tell you how many professors have sent me papers that we've looked on Dropbox. They don't care. They're putting their stuff up there now and using those collaborative tools. So it's pretty clear that there's a demand for these types of tools. So the infrastructure seems to be there, and there seems to be a willingness that we can use it. But creating that platform, I guess that's what you're alluding to. Realistically, should our committee say as a university, or to Bob, really, we've got to build it ourselves. We've got to get together with the consortium of Ontario University. I think there's something similar happened in BC because of their privacy laws. They have a. So how long are we looking at to realistically build something like this, and what would be the cost and the human resources involved to build it?
I can take a stab at that. It's my industry. We turned up 2 million boxes and shot in 6 months flat.
With all
start
the
to
other
finish. Yes.
sort of
Yes.
collaborative tools,
Yep.
everything?
Yep, voice, email, blogs, posting, document share. It's known technology. It's been out there, like, you know, Office 365 is just an iteration of a service that Microsoft's had now for 15 years. It's not that difficult. Now, mind you, I'm in the industry, so I found it not too difficult, but it is doable, and the know-how exists within your university. Your comp sci guys are great. You guys at Waterloo, we work on a lot, and certainly have a lot of input and know-how behind this, so it is doable. It absolutely is doable.
Did I hear you say your company has a contract with Bell?
Yes.
And it still hasn't?
We're actually winding it down because we decided to step away from the market because we weren't getting a lot of traction. Because a lot of the messages that are delivered today, we were talking about 4 or 5 years ago. And it was just like literally talking with, and so
but you don't want to be harsh, but you're winding down, and I guess part, as an administrator of the university, I just want to go with the company that's going to have some longevity.
Mm-hmm.
And so my concern is that.
How about Shaw? How about Bell? How about, you know, the telcos that we're building this for? We're winding down. I'm not saying go to us, by no means. That's not my intention.
Yeah.
My intention is to open. Yeah, there are other opportunities inside of Canada, and lots of great organizations that are capable of doing that. And like I said, this IP is readily available. We will share it with you. We'll tell you how to do it. It's certainly there.
Just Greg, and I think we should probably turn off the video feed because we're getting into a conversation rather than presentation. I don't think it's appropriate that we're.
Bye.
Bye.
So say goodbye. Bye. Thank you.
Okay, now we can really say it.